me like, yeah, man, we did great. Good on you, man. We're sitting here going, why? Because all we've done is watch ourselves grow in December and be like, yeah, yeah, it's like vindication. I know what I was talking about. And now it's like sitting here, a few months later, like looking at your portfolio, being like, what have I done?
Happy Liberation Day.
So welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. This is episode 55. And today we actually have a special guest with us. I'm going to be giving the mic first and having a whole segment. The first part of this show is going to be dedicated to Amr, who's the founder and leader of the Foward Party of Canada. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because, as you guys probably already know, we're in election season. We're talking politics pretty much every episode these days, and this is a great moment of political change, if I do say so myself. So I think that, stuff regarding politics and stuff like in Canada right now, it's a great time to be talking about politics because there's a lot of pressing issues that we need to deal with as a nation. So, why don't we jump right into it, the first segment. First of all, I just want Amr, you to maybe introduce yourselves to our audience who don't know you, because I know this is your first time on the show. Why did you start this political party, the Foward Party of Canada? What's wrong with Canada, right? Like, what are the problems that you're trying to fix? Like, I don't want to make it sound like, what's wrong with you, but like, there's a lot of things wrong with this country, right? So like, what do you see is going not correct with this country, and why are the, major parties kind of not fit to deal with these, the existing parties, I mean, not fit to deal with these issues? What are your goals of this new political party? And lastly, and we'll circle back to this because this is kind of a big topic, but we'll get your opinions on this upcoming election that's coming on April 28th. But before we get to all that, let me just pass the mic to you, and then you can give all of us maybe a quick intro.
I think the first thing you ask is like, what's wrong with Canada, and where do we even start, right? Like, I'm sure you're all feeling it. I'm feeling it. All my friends are feeling it. It feels like there was sort of a cutoff some time ago where if you made it across to the good life, then the Canadian dream worked for you, and if you didn't, you're kind of screwed. And the problem that for me personally was that I did everything right. At least that's what I've been told, right? Like, you go study and a good paying career, get married, moving together, and all of that stuff, and you assume you reach a certain level of income and you start having certain levels of expectations. And when I started looking at my income before I got married, I came to the conclusion that despite being a well-paid software developer, I wouldn't be able to move out by myself. And so accelerated my plans, my wife and my plans to get married and moving together. And part of it was, why spend so much time saving money, like, spending so much and not saving money? So let's do this. But then it just kept eating away at my mind. And I was like, around the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I was like, whenever I'd look at my paycheck, I'd be like, this is a good paycheck. Where is the problem? And you look it up online and you find out that you're doing not just well, you're doing fantastic in terms of numbers, but your quality of life is nowhere near what you would have expected to be. The average of everything is ridiculous. And so I dug a little bit further, and you find, like, the real estate market. All right, what's wrong with the real estate market? It has become the biggest industry in Canada. Investors are eating it up left and right. It's affecting rents. It's affecting cost of living. It's affecting commercial spaces. So now even businesses are also dealing with that problem. And then I looked, like, the the liberals failed, so let's see what the conservatives say. And I was disappointed. Like, they were shouting all of these things about what's wrong with Canada and not really offering solutions. I got hooked into that promises, and then I tried to find what they actually want to do, only to find out it was the same things Harper were doing. And things were bad at Harper's time. Like, if you actually go right now and look up news articles from 2015 before Trudeau's election, and look at what he was campaigning on, it was the exact same problems we're dealing with now. Look at the type of problems our media outlets were sharing. It's the exact same problems. Younger people are having a difficult time raising families, moving out, reaching that milestone. And those who put that milestone off are dealing with even higher rents. So where do we go from here? And then I found that the same applied to every single topic I looked into, whether it's homelessness and drug addiction, elections, our public infrastructure, our regulations. They're all fall into the same pattern, where the liberals and the conservatives promise the same thing. So who's the alternative in Canada, right? Like, you'd say the NDP for a lot of people, but they are basically the liberals light. And who else there is left, right? Like, the small parties are very single issue, or extremists, or just average centrists that don't really see the problem that needs to be solved with the same urgency. And so I had the ridiculous idea that, well, this is a democracy, right? If there's nobody offering you what you want, if nobody's living up to your ideals, maybe you should put it out there and, embody them. And that's sort of what got me started about the Foward Party, I guess. And it's been a rocky 2 years since. I had a little bit of a period of time where I was like, is this too ridiculous? And then global news kept happening. Canada's situations kept staying the same, and nobody came up to fill that gap that I still see. And so I was like, maybe I should get back into it. And now here I am, pitching it to you guys on this podcast.
Obviously, I have my biased opinions. I think that there's I have told you multiple times before, Amr, we've had conversations back and forth about this, that in my opinion, there is a big solution that's out there that can solve a lot of the financial related issues that you just mentioned. In case you haven't guessed, I'm talking about Bitcoin. But I understand this is maybe like a situation where if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like, as a Bitcoiner, I think, like, everything can be solved with Bitcoin. But I do agree with you to a large extent that, like, it's not going to be a cure-all, right? Like, the problems that we face in Canada are in a lot of ways systemic to just, like the political system. And we always rotate between these two major parties. We have a de facto two-party system, even though Canadians like to take pride that, oh, we're so different than the Americans. The Americans have a two-party system. We have a multi-party parliamentary system, but face it, like, there's only been two parties that's rotating, being in charge since forever, right? Like, in 2011, the NDP got close, but they didn't get in charge. So yeah. Anyways, thank you for explaining all of that. Now, maybe I just want to, like, share with you my story of how I met Amr. I was just, like, browsing on Twitter, or it's now called X, and I just found his X channel, and I found it really interesting, and I decided to, like, just DM him, and he likes talking about politics. I like talking about politics. We just, like, shoot back and forth random ideas. That huge, like, document that I wrote with, like, the 12-point plan on how I thought Canada could be improved, that was written for the Foward Party of Canada, just because I like to shout into the void, into, like, to hopefully hit some ears that would listen. Even
still keep it. It's not in the void, don't worry. I think it's a lot of good ideas.
Thank you. So yeah, anyways, that's the story of how I got involved with the Foward Party of Canada. And I do think that we need some fresh new energy to kind of break up potentially this two-party system. I know it's like a lot. I'm making it sound a lot easier than it actually is, but at least like I think we need to make an effort to include fresh new ideas and fresh new political movements that are not these, like as you said, Amr, like fringe parties or like one issue parties, right?
What you refer to is precisely what I would love to see more of in Canada, the spirit of experimentation and of trying new things. There's a few core issues that I am firmly convinced that need to be addressed as soon as possible. And these issues don't require anything too crazy, like the real estate, our real estate situation, our electoral system, our national security, which is finally getting some public attention, our homelessness and drugs crisis, and the state of our public service, and a few more that you can find on the website, like those 10 points that are up there. But then these alone will not fix the core problems that we're dealing with, right? Because you can go out right now and you can see a lot of parties pitching similar ideas. But what it seems many fail to notice is that once we fix these, we have even more fundamental issues we need to address. Our economy is very outdated in many ways, and there's so much new technology out there that has so much potential I didn't even know about. Like, I think to your topic of Bitcoin, I only knew vaguely about what the technology is. I always believed, like, hey, I was one of those guys, like, blockchain has potential, but I don't know about cryptocurrencies. And then by talking to you, I got to learn that, hey, maybe there's actually some fundamental value to Bitcoin. Do I think we should base our entire financial system on it? I still have doubts. But that's the type of debates that we need to be having these days, right? We don't need to be like, well, this is how we've been doing things for the past 50 years. It's clearly good. Let's not change anything about it. But maybe we should. And there's that spirit of, like long-term focus, balance, debate, experiment, like I keep saying about experimentation, this knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and this use of technology. That is something that I would love the Forward Party to stand for. And I believe Canadians need that vision more than ever now.
Yeah, no, totally agreed with you. And I'll put a link to the Forward Party's website and X channel down in today's video description. So if you're an audience member watching, please be sure to check out the official website and X channel of the Forward Party of Canada. I do want to give the other guys some opportunity to kind of chime in. So, Tristan, Sunil, if you two are watching, and if you have questions, now would be the time to, maybe direct some questions to Amr, or if you don't have questions, just general comments on anything that we just talked about.
Well, I mean, okay, here's a tough question that I like to ask people, and I never get an answer. So this is a tough one. And the truth is that, like, a lot of the people in my circle are a lot of like center left people, a lot of people who would vote typically for the Liberal Party or NDP. So they are at a stage where they've decided that they can acknowledge that Canada is a big spender and we've got a big budget problem in this country. But whenever I ask them straight up, what would you cut? I never get an answer. So I'll ask you right now, give me 2 programs that you would be willing to cut 100%.
That's a tough question, actually. That's a very tough question.
It is.
I think, you see, I don't know what all the programs out there are, but what I will say, like, the key, in my humble opinion, for what needs to be cut in government is not necessarily the programs themselves, but it's the sheer amount of bloat in many of the departments within government. Like, I live here in Ottawa, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people I know work in the public sector, and even complain about it, right? And so if the bureaucrats think there's so much bureaucracy, and the general public sees the government's fumbling around with all of their funding, the key here may not be to just shutter down an entire program first. The key would be to identify which parts are inefficient. Does that mean reducing workforces? I think that would probably be necessary in a few departments. Are there any social programs that are cut outright right now. I wouldn't promise that, but I promise that we should review them. Like, we should review each program. Is this really necessary? Could this be?
Can I clarify one thing?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a social program. It can be any program, anything the Canadian federal government does. It doesn't have to be like a social program like dental care. It could be like the CBC. So that, just to give you more options in your, because saying you're gonna like cut healthcare is a tough question for sure. I don't anticipate anybody would say they would cut healthcare.
No.
So I'm just giving you a little bit of rope. Like, is there anything the federal government does that's like that you would cut 100%?
The problem is, like, one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to commit to something I'm not knowledgeable about, or at least I don't have a good understanding of. This, like, it might sound like I'm trying to dodge your question, but that's genuinely where it's coming from. Is that I cannot say with confidence that I've seen a program and I was like, yep, that needs to go away entirely. I see, like, your point about the CBC, for example. I think we need a publicly funded news organization. We just need it to be extremely neutral. I don't like how the CBC tends to have a bias towards whoever's running the show right now. But I think if we remove public funded news organization, then we'll risk only privately funded media being there, and maybe consolidation of the market. I think that might be risky. For healthcare, I would be against expanding coverage right now. I wouldn't add, like, I'm against the ideas of like dental coverage, let's say. I don't think we have the funds to do so. But I think our big problem is, like I mentioned, like, we have so many bureaucrats, it's absurd. I think some comparisons to Germany put us at like 5 to 10 times as many bureaucrats, like healthcare administrators, as they do. So I'll turn it around and ask you, what are some programs you think should be cut 100%? And why? Because I'm not against the idea, I just don't know which programs
Sure.
would be.
I think the CBC should be cut 100% because I don't think that it's really appropriate for the government to have state-sponsored media. I think that I don't think the CBC has really moved the needle in making the quality of Canadians' access to information any better. I don't think Canadians are more well informed than any other people in the world because of the CBC. And I don't think the people who view the CBC who use the CBC as their primary news source are particularly well informed either when compared to other people. So I just don't see the mandate of the CBC to be really any value. And I think that it's actually insulting to have the CBC have one public news organization that is clearly biased towards one party that often funds their programs. So it just doesn't really make sense. I think sometimes you got to just like throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think the CBC would qualify for that. I think it could probably function on its own by funding itself. I don't see any reason why the Canadian taxpayer should fund such a crappy organization. And that's my own opinion, that it's a crappy organization. So I'm just ejecting that into it. Another example of a program I'd cut 100% is job retraining programs. I think these are kind of like very condescending programs that were kind of introduced during globalization to try to convince people that if they signed up for free trade deals that they could retrain 50-year-olds in jobs, but it's actually just throwing money at a problem that doesn't really solve anything. I don't think job retraining is a solution for killing people's jobs through like things like globalization. Because it doesn't work. It has never worked. The data has shown that job retraining programs across the Western world have been a complete waste of money, and they've distorted markets, and they haven't resulted in people earning money in other middle-class jobs. Generally, when people like retrain themselves, like they leave a corporate job and decide to be a real estate agent or something like that, and then end up becoming successful, they can make a lot of money. But it's not really something where like the government of Canada has retrained its population into being more productive. So I wouldn't really fund job retraining programs. And I think they've been a complete waste of money since they were introduced in the 80s.
Yeah, I think there's this bad habit of assuming that anything that gets lost, if we throw enough money at it, can be fixed. It's the question I always ask myself whenever I see or I hear about such programs is it a matter of the program itself being a failure, or the case of, let's say, political inefficiency getting in the way, right? Like, would have like the job retraining would it have been more effective if it was just funding for educational institutions that made it easier for them to offer courses that the market needs, right? And it's this type of discussion that, like, I can't tell you I have an objective answer or something there, but I'll be very curious, like, if you share with me after. Love to
Sure,
listen.
I can do some Googling for sure on the raw job retraining. It's been a while since I've looked into the issue, but generally anybody who's like looked into it has shown that like when like countries like Canada, the US, and a lot of Western world countries have introduced it, it's just been throwing money at the problem. And just to further your point, I think it's just when you are able to like make an announcement as a government and say we're putting like $2 billion towards something, it just makes it seem like you're doing something, but often you're not doing anything. You're just making an announcement. But I'm taking up a lot of time here, so I'll give Tristan a chance to ask you some questions.
Okay.
But sorry, go on.
Yeah, so before we go to Tristan, I think I have an answer for your original question. I would cut a lot of the subsidies that we pay out to big companies.
That's a good answer,
I don't know if that's one program, but I think the idea itself needs to be done.
I think that's an excellent answer. Good job. Good work on that one. That's good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an explicit question per se. I did want to kind of talk more about like your story, you know, of coming out of university, getting a good job, but then being like, oh wait, I can't afford anything and I'm never going to be able to afford anything kind of vibe. Because I had a very similar experience coming out of university and seeing the housing market and going, oh, it's just not an option. It's just it's not going to be viable. At least in Ontario, which is why I've since moved to Alberta, where housing is more reasonably priced. But I did think that was a funny, or maybe not funny, but like it's a common spot where I feel like a lot of people are coming out of school and basically finding that exact scenario that you're kind of describing, where you've graduated, you've gotten a good job, you should be able to buy something, but it's just completely unviable. So I can see why that would make you be more inclined to start a party to change that. The one thing that like I do kind of wonder with that kind of approach though is like why your own party rather than try and join a party and change it from within. If there's you know, since let's be real, the liberals and the conservatives basically have a monopoly on parties and on leadership at this point. So maybe that's where I'll go with my question.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because that is the question everybody I know asks me, like my parents, my friends, my wife, and it's a reasonable thing. And so I think what a lot of people are doing. I think there's a lot of more young people joining these parties hoping to change it from within. The issue for me though is that I don't think any of them can change from within. Maybe they can eventually in like 10 years, 20 years, but it would be too late by that point in time. The way I see it, like, this is a ticking time bomb, and we're practically in a bubble that nobody is prepared for. I personally anticipate before the next election, we're going to have a financial crisis. And in Canada, that's going to be the real estate market collapsing. Now, my ideal thing is to responsibly pop the bubble, you know, deliberately. But if not that, then at least be prepared for that eventuality. What I've noticed is also that the big problem with a lot of the leadership in big political parties is that they tend to be one generation removed from whatever the current problem is. And they are the ones who have the most power and the most influence in the party. So if they don't see it as a problem, sometimes they just don't act on it. But like the even bigger problem than just that age gap is that I think the major parties are too compromised in a sense. Their own, there was a stat from a few years ago. It was something like 40% of the MPs across all parties, including the NDP, are real estate investors or landlords in some capacity. If the problem that I'm advocating for. Like, what I'm saying here is that the biggest problem in Canada's economy is that we're extremely reliant on real estate and extracting rent from our citizens. Are we really going to have the members, 40% of the members of parliament, vote against their own interest? I think it's ridiculous that that conflict of interest even exists. But how can you move that? And then you factor in that a lot of our biggest companies are involved in that industry. A lot of investor money is like funding a lot of these candidates, a lot of these parties, and then the final cherry on top is that the type of changes that will really address the core of the problem are so deep cutting that no major party is willing to actually go and do that. They would rather offer band-aids, small fixes, this whole idea of like we tweak our system a little bit by little bit, and then we'll get there eventually. We'll just like power through it. I don't think that's what we need anymore. I think we need to fundamentally reshape how a lot of the country works on a political side. And part of that is the real estate, part of that is the electoral system, and part of that is how we do government in the first place. Like, I do think we're extremely bloated, extremely hierarchical, extremely out of touch with the technologies of the day. All of that needs to be redone. I think our immigration system is quite horrible, even before the recent uptick in immigration numbers. That also needs to be redone from the ground up. Same goes for our healthcare. And all of these problems, who out there, like how many politicians out there are going to go on and promise such a level of change? I don't see them doing it, and that's why I'm concerned. Like for example, a recent example, like a while back, even like just a few years ago, one of the top issues that the Liberal caucus was interested in is electoral reform. Yet the party keeps ignoring it time and time again. On the conservative side, there was a big push from within the party to have more citizens and act as advisories to Puliyev, but he still ended up having 50% of his advisors be lobbyists, including a big portion from real estate. And so can we really trust them to do this again, like to do things differently if they're not actually being held accountable for the past? I don't think so.
Yeah, good points. And with that being said, I don't want to like set this up as like a question to make you immediately contradict yourself or anything like that. But the fact is, we have an election coming on April 28th, which is less than a month from now. And I know, like, you've told me about your efforts to, officially get registered and get candidates registered on the ballot and stuff. And I've been trying to help you as much as I can, but unfortunately, I'm not like a Instagram influencer with 100,000 followers or something. So like, there's only so much I can do, right? Like, I signed I asked you to sign the petition. You asked me to sign the petition to like get registered, and hopefully, like if there's any audience members who are watching, that if you would like to register if you're a Canadian citizen and you'd like to support the Foward Party, please by all means do so. And you can find the information on the link down below in the description, which I'll link. But I'm assuming that you're probably not going to be able to set everything up by April 28th in time for this upcoming election, because we weren't expecting an election this early. A lot of people were saying that we're going to get pushed all the way till October, but various things happen, and then now we're in election campaign season. So assuming that you're not on the ballot and you can't vote for yourself, you have a decision now to make on April 28th, right? Like, who is I know you just like said all the parties kind of suck in some way, shape, or form, but you have to make a decision, right? Like, April 28th is gonna come, and what do you do? Like, do you stay home and not vote, or do you like kind of pick the least bad option, or like what's and by the way, like, this is a decision that I believe, Tristan, you are struggling with as well, so you're not alone in this struggle. But I just kind of want to get your opinion, Amr, on what your decision will be on April 28th, assuming that you can't, get yourself or get the Foward Party on the ballot by that time.
Yes, that's a very good question. The first thing I'll say is like staying home and not voting is absolutely the worst way to protest in a democracy. The absolute worst way. I can't even think of any worse way. Well, maybe I can, but like, it's the absolute worst way to protest a democracy. Before I get to who I would vote for, I would say that the part of last, like a big part of why we haven't built any more momentum is that I stopped posting and the Forward Party stopped posting for pretty much the majority of last year. And part of this touches on this little point of doubt. Like, I'll be honest, like it's a lot of doubts. Am I being too crazy? Am I being ridiculous? Am I not doing the best at work? I wasn't. Figure that out. But well, once I figured out a lot of personal stuff I sat down with myself and I thought for a bit about how serious am I about this, and why am I so interested in it. I came to the conclusion that not doing anything and only trying to work on like my day job or trying to start a business or any of those things, I came to the conclusion that that's not for me. I really, really want to get into politics, and I want to get it into it the way I believe it should be done. The second question was then, well, there's an election coming up in October. What can I do by then? And is that really the highest priority? And for me, like to touch on the point I mentioned before about the potential for a financial crisis in the next, over the next 5 years, I think this election doesn't matter. Whether it happened in October or it happened sooner, like as soon as Trudeau stepped down, I had a feeling that they'll run in as soon as possible. But regardless of which outcome it ended up being, I am fairly confident to say that whether it's Carney or Poilievre who ends up running the country, we're going to see more of the same. Fans of the Liberals will say the Liberals will do a little bit better. Fans of the Conservatives will say the Conservatives will do a little bit better. But neither of them have what it takes, or neither of them has the capacity to actually handle a financial crisis. And my biggest concern politically is, where will Canadians go if the establishment parties are unviable in the public imagination? And they tend to go to extremists unless there is a more radical option that is not extreme. And to that end, my dream, if you indulge me for a second, is to be like what Churchill was to the British during World War II, where he was extremely unpopular, like nobody cared about him onto the lead up to World War II because he was a warmonger. He was too scared, too paranoid. But then when it ended up the case that he was right, then he was right there ready to take over and handle things. The UK did not fall to communist or fascist revolutions. Is that where Canada is? I don't think so. I don't think it's that bad, but 5 years is a long amount of time. And if we can be there as the voice of reason that's willing to do things fundamentally differently without ruining people's lives, then that's the position I'd like to occupy in 5 years. So this brings us back to what to do about this election. I think the best use for anybody who's frustrated with the election season or like with the state of our politics in Canada is to not vote strategically. Go out there and genuinely vote for who you think would be the least worst option, even if they're a minor party or an independent candidate. Because at the end of the day, if all of these strategists at each of the big campaigns looks to review the results of the previous election, like in however many years of the current election, if they look at the results and they found that suddenly there's an uptick of independents getting a lot of votes, or the Greens, or I don't know, whoever else is out there, I think that will send a stronger message than just staying home, and a much stronger message than voting strategically for who you think is more likely to win. Because at the end of the day, the more we vote strategically, the more likely we are to become a literal two-party system instead of a figurative one. And yeah, so that's it. Who will I endorse in my current riding? I will admit I have not looked at who's running in my riding yet. I know that I promised myself I will not vote for Liberal, Conservative, or NDP. If my option ends up being the Greens, I'll go for it. If my option, well, the PPC either. I'm not going to vote for the PPC. I think they're the opposite of what I'd love to see. And so I'll just see who's out there. Does it end up being a libertarian candidate? Maybe. Does it end up being an independent who was just frustrated? Maybe. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good enough answer. And on your point with the strategic voting, I totally agree with you on that, because it's like if everybody strategic votes, we're going to be, that's how we get stuck with like bad options, right? Because like you're just picking a party that you don't, that doesn't really represent you, just because you hate another party, and you pick a party that's like the party that's in second place that you hate less but doesn't represent you either. Like it creates a mess, and if we all did that, like we're asking for trouble, right? And just to like kind of back up what I'm saying, we just had an election in Ontario, and I know that I think all of us here, except for Tristan, lives in Ontario. But Tristan, you're from Ontario too, so you know all about Doug Ford. And you guys know I'm not a big fan of Doug Ford. And even though I'm more, I would say, conservative leaning these days, I don't actually believe that Doug Ford's a real conservative. He's a conservative in name only. So I was very dissatisfied with the way that the Ontario progressive conservatives have been running the province. But at the same time, like we've had liberal Ontario governments before, and they didn't exactly do a great job either. In a lot of aspects, I feel like they did it even worse than Doug Ford. So I didn't really feel comfortable voting liberal either and giving them a second chance. And the NDP, I feel like this is just me personally. They're a little bit too far left for me, even the provincial ones. So I ended up voting for the New Blue Party, which is kind of the up and coming conservative, like true conservative party in Ontario. And I know like people try to like paint the New Blue Party as like, alt-right and stuff like that. If you actually look at what they're standing for, it's like basically politically aligned with the federal conservatives. So that's my opinion. So but the New Blue Party was polling at like, I don't know, 3% in Ontario or something like that. Like there was no like chance that they were gonna win. And I believe in my writing, there was only like 900 other people that voted for the New Blue candidate in my entire writing. So like they got nowhere close to like even like third place. So but it doesn't matter to me, right? Like I voted for the party that I feel like represented my views the most, even if they ended up in like fourth place. So that's just me. But yeah, does anybody else have any comments, questions for Amr?
Yeah, this one might be slightly longer, but I was wondering why you're so convinced that there's going to be a financial crisis in the next 5 years. Is it just the housing market? Because like from my perspective on the housing market, we have too few houses for the number of people we have already. So for me, the bubble bursting seems to be something that's not liable to happen very rapidly, just because of the fact that we have more people than we have housing available for at this current stage and into the future, like the foreseeable future, because just of the mismanagement of the immigration system from my perspective. So just based on that, like, is it just the housing or is there something else? I was just wondering because you seem pretty convinced on that one.
Yeah, I am fairly convinced on that one. I think it's more of like the housing being like a tumor that's affecting the whole economy, where it's not the fact, I mean, you are correct, like people will always need homes. The problem is that how much money is actually being put in is illogical. We are reaching levels that are pretty close to where Japan was when they had their financial crisis. And it was also not exclusively a problem of real estate. But I think in Canada, we have this issue where the returns for so long, the returns on investing on a property were so much higher than investing in a business. And that's been true for a couple decades. What we end up with it, and we have a relatively weak economy that on paper looks great. On paper, we have high GDP numbers, even per capita. I know now it's worse, but it's still technically high. But then, does that actually reflect the economic activity being done, or does it just reflect rich people throwing houses in between each other? I think it reflects the second, but it also reflects that a lot of people are getting into bigger and bigger piles of debt just to finance their lives. And so what happens when that starts to reach logical levels once again? Like we are now hearing about 35 to 40-year-old year-long mortgages. I mean, what's next? Like if it doesn't change, are we going to go for 50 years after? That becomes absurd. And to your point, I am fairly convinced, but I'm open to the idea that I might indeed be wrong, right? If I am wrong and things work out without crisis, I think I'll be happy. I mean, that'll be wonderful. But my worry was and still is, what if I'm right? Right? Like if I'm wrong, things are nice and rosy, but if I'm wrong, I think it will be ugly. And so it's the idea, like the reason the real estate is a central part of what I believe the solution should be, is that ideally we would set up our economy in such a way that any investors fleeing the asset bubble would start investing into other businesses within Canada instead of holding on to cash, or even worse, sending their money abroad. And so it becomes this problem that ties into a lot of other things that then go back and feed the problem. I mean, what major companies did Canada grow in the past decades, 2 decades? We've had quite a few big ones close down. Nortel, I work with one of the multinationals that bought part of their operations. We've had BlackBerry just like completely downsize. And I know we have a few sectors where we are leading, still are. But have we done anything new? Not really. We have Shopify, I guess, but we don't have really anything from the digital age onwards, even though we have a strong tech sector. It all works for the sake of foreign companies. And where does that leave us? I'd say the second problem now that I anticipate might cause a financial crisis is whatever happens down south. It has become so chaotic and unpredictable and there are always indications that the market is a little bit too high. It's the worry now is, if a correction happens, how steep? And given that Canada is so tied up to the American economy in many ways, and we're already seeing the effects right now, what does that do to us? And how do the dominoes fall? That's also a big problem.
Yeah, I had one more question for you. An observation I've made personally, and like kind of a belief I've had, is it seems like across the Western world, a lot of the center left parties are like just collapsing. They're just becoming very unpopular very quickly. And like to me, it almost seems like center left parties in the Western world will like all collapse completely until they're replaced by new ones. On the other hand, and I do notice there's a lot of like online movements and online activities that are kind of like, what's it called? Like realigning political beliefs. And like, I'm assuming that like post MAGA, which is like realigned political beliefs on like the right wing side, there's likely going to be a realignment on the left wing side. But what I've seen is that most like political movements online don't translate into successful new parties. What ends up happening, what we're seeing in Europe, is that you get like these extremist parties just get hijacked by people. And then like the media will still call them fascist, but they're not real. They got hijacked by like Bitcoiners or somebody else or some group of people. Is there like a model around the world that you're looking at that like is working well? Is there a country in the Western world that's like where there's a new leftist force that you think that like is a good model for Canada? Or do you think that this will happen because like new leftist parties will rise, or do you think this will happen because leftists like special interest, like leftist forces online just hijack somebody? Like, how do you think this is going to play out, and what do you think is like something we should be watching in Canada as a model?
I will say I fully agree with you that I do also anticipate the center-left parties to almost all collapse. The more they stay the same. They made a few big mistakes, focusing too much on identity politics and not questioning immigration numbers, for example. But and to your point, also, I do agree that like there is this a lot of extremists try to overtake small parties for their own goals. It is something that I have been extremely worried about, even though the odds of the Forward Party becoming big enough to attract such attention is small. It is why I haven't posted on social media for a while, is that I don't feel I'm ready to sell people on a vision that they can get behind. And I think that's gonna be the key. For across the Western world, on the center left, yeah, well, it depends on who you define as center left. I think what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with sort of, even possibly that's also, that would require leftists to agree on what they want the left to represent. And there's a very wide range of beliefs that contradict each other.
Are we witnessing a hijacking of a center left party by Bitcoiners right now with the Forward Party?
You see, I don't. From what I've seen, Bitcoiners don't hijack leftist parties. They tend to hijack libertarian or like right-wing parties. Leftists, even though the technology should be like, you know, very, you would think it would be something that a lot of communists and socialists would be interested in. But I guess its association with money automatically puts it in the capitalist class to some people, maybe.
It's the same observation I always made, because like I'm like somebody who's kind of always been like a socialist type thinker. I'm not anymore. I've grown up from those views, but like I was like an NDP type guy, and I was like, why wouldn't you want money? You don't have to manage. Like if you have money, you don't have to manage. You could do whatever you want now. Like you could just get rid of something. But like yeah, the left are insistent on managing everything. Like they really want to control everything. And that was like an eye-opening experience for me as a Bitcoiner trying to talk to leftists.
And I think a big thing that blocks the way of sort of like a Western MAGA equivalent to the leftist parties is that the Soviets kind of like burned a lot of people on the idea on leftist ideals. We didn't really have an equivalent on the right. Now, this might be a point of a disagreement, but I think MAGA is the type of movement that is almost doomed to fail, in my opinion. But it captures the sort of energy and that desire for like deep change that I believe is necessary. And I'm not saying everything they do is wrong. And that's the problem that a lot of leftists fall into. They're so scared of trying to look like the far right that they just end up being the status quo. And that is the most anti-leftist ideal out there, is to maintain the status quo as it is. I saw in the most recent elections in Germany, there was the AfD did pretty well, so that was on the right side, but there was a leftist group, there was a leftist party that did pretty well. It was just kind of on second place in terms of best performers. I think that'll be interesting. What I think what we might see, though, is more along the lines of what Macron's party ended up being. What it isn't truly a leftist party, but it's sort of trying to have like a more radical centrist type of approach where they have this vision of what they think the country should look like, and they're really committed to getting it done. Yeah, so that's my prediction. I don't think we'll have a leftist MAGA equivalent. I think we'll just have a bunch of fractured parties trying to fill that role.
We should probably move on to the rest of our docket today if you guys are ready. And I know, Amr, you also pay attention to a lot of what's happening in the United States. So I'm sure you can chime in a lot on the rest of today's topics as well, which is going to be very fun to talk about. So if you guys are ready, let's move on to the second story of tonight, which is Liberation Day, or as I like to call it, and many people on X, Liquidation Days, because we have all been liquidated or liberated from our wallets at this point after the events that have occurred after the Rose Garden speech by Trump. So in case you missed it, I don't know how you would have missed it, but in case you missed it, Trump just kind of started a trade war with the entire world. And here's a picture. If you guys are on the docket, here's a picture of, here's a list of all the countries that Trump has slapped tariffs on. And the China one's actually inaccurate because he already slapped 20% tariffs before previously. And then now it's an additional 34%. So it's a total of 54% tariffs on China. And yeah, like all the rest, I know like Vietnam gave some concessions to Trump before, but that didn't prevent him from slapping 46% tariffs on Vietnam anyways. And even Israel agreed to drop all the tariffs that they had against the US. Trump still slapped 17% tariffs on Israel. So yeah, a lot of countries not very happy. And the stock market is also not very happy. I think this was like one of the biggest one-day drops of, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, you name it, NASDAQ. And as a result, the Atlanta Fed GDP Now estimate, and this was actually the GDP Now estimate came on April 1st. So this was before the so-called Liberation Day. So this is not even factoring in the news that like Trump decided to tariff like every country in the world. And also, by the way, there's a 10% tariff baseline on pretty much every country in the world that's like not even on this list. So like at minimum is 10% on everyone, but the countries on this list, some of them have extra tariffs. So the Atlanta GDP Now estimate has now put the Q1 GDP numbers for the US's GDP growth to be negative 3.7%. So that's a massive contraction. And, the way that GDP is measured, it takes into account gold imports. So, maybe that's not like that's a thing that we should adjust out. But even if you adjust out the gold effect, it's still negative. Still negative like 1.7, 1.8%, something like that. So it's still a negative number, although the blue chip consensus, which is like, all the other economists and everyone else they're still putting it in positive territory. But this is different now after Liberation Day. So who knows? But it's definitely a time when the markets are kind of at peak fear in terms of, well, I shouldn't say markets are at peak fear. I don't know that, right? But it seems like it's at peak fear for recession coming and, the trade war and the negative effects. So this is not good news. And, if you have any stocks or even Bitcoin, it has dropped significantly after the announcement. So I just kind of want to get you guys' takes on this because I've heard multiple takes and it varies wildly. It depends on if you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, right? Obviously, the people who are not fans of Trump in the first place, they're obviously going to say that like Trump is just a crazy guy, like he's just doing this because he hates you or something like that, right? But coming from someone who I would say is somewhat pro-Trump, and I supported him during his campaign run in 2024. I think that maybe there's some sort of, deeper plan at play here other than he just hates you and want your portfolio to go down, right? Because that doesn't make sense to me, but maybe we can have a debate on that. But in my opinion, what he's doing is he's been yelling about trying to decrease the interest rates, right? So he wants Jay Powell to lower interest rates, but Jay Powell is not willing to. So then now it's like a roll up your sleeve, fine, I'll do it myself kind of thing. Where if he, the more he talks about these tariffs, the more the stock market goes down. But you know what else goes down? The 10-year yield of the 10-year treasury note, which is what's pegged to mortgages. So if the 10-year yield drops, meaning that the price, because yield and price of the bond is opposite, right? So if the yield drop, that means that the price of the bond goes up. So he wants a yield, he wants the interest rate to drop on the 10-year, so that mortgages become more affordable. And also a big thing is that I read somewhere that there's around $6 trillion of debt that needs to be refinanced in 2025. So getting the 10-year down is very important, because then he can then the treasury can refinance the debt at a lower interest rate. And when you're talking about multiple trillions of dollars that needs to be refinanced, every basis point matters a lot, right? So as you can see by this chart, as soon as the tariff announcement was announced, the 10-year dropped from it was like 4.2%, and now it's just barely over 4%. And yeah, if the longer this drags on, the more the stocks fall. I feel like the more that the yields are going to drop as well. And oil today has also dropped around 6%. So it's now at $66 per barrel, which is a lot lower than where it was just last week. And lower oil prices is going to lead to decreasing inflation, which is good news for the Fed, because I was just watching the CME prediction tool for the CME Fed Watch for the interest rate cut prediction for next month, which is the next FOMC meeting is on May 7th, where the Fed will decide whether to cut interest rates or not. And granted, it's still more likely that they won't cut interest rates than they will. So right now I'm seeing around a 32% chance that the Fed will cut 25 basis points, and a 67% chance that they won't do anything. They'll hold rates steady. So granted, it's still like a 1/3 chance of a rate cut. But let me tell you, this tool was predicting 9% chance of a rate cut last week, or not even last week, just earlier this week, before the Liberation Day announcement. So it went from 9 to 32. And if you were on, like, let's say Polymarket, you can bet on this on Polymarket, by the way. You would have made a lot of money if you bet for a 25 basis point rate cut in May, because it went from 9 to 32, right? So you would have like more than tripled your money right there. So yeah, that's it is like working to some extent to get some of the goals that Trump said he wanted to achieve, to like, it does get him closer, right? Like 10-year note is down, oil is down, which will cause inflation to come down. And the Fed seems more willing to cut interest rates than they were before. And so there are some things that are going Trump's way, but obviously, as we discussed before, if Trump really, like, is Trump really just crazy? Like, if he tanks the market, that's not good for him either, right? So like, what is the end game here, right? I'm trying to figure out, and I would appreciate answers other than he's just a crazy guy, or he's just stupid or something like that, because I really genuinely don't think that that's the right answer. And if you just try to be as unbiased possible, like just pretend you're not talking about Trump and just try to drop as many preconceived notions about him as you can. Just look at the situation objectively. Like, what is the end game? Why is he doing this? Is he really gonna like try and tariff the world, tariff China at 54% and just hold it there for 4 years and then just never relent on anything? Or like, or is there a negotiation that's going to happen at some point? What's going to happen? What is the end game? Does anybody want to take it away?
Okay, I can go first. I think that like the first thing I'll say is that like we already know it's been well established that like what Trump says shouldn't be taken 100% seriously. Like there's always an element of truth to it. But like the general idea that Trump is gonna like raise tariffs to like up to 50-60% in some countries, and keep it permanent. I think there's only a few countries on the list that actually move the needle. But then again, like it's impossible for Trump to maintain something like a 34 or 50% tariff on China for any extended period of time without doing excessive damage on the U.S. economy. That's probably true for Europe, and that's probably true for some of the other big economies that are on this list. It's fairly like been established that like every time that Trump announces this, like within 24 hours of like the tariffs coming in place, he announces that he's pulling up the tariffs and they're going to do a negotiation. So there's like certainly negotiations that Trump wants to have, especially around trade. I think the main thing that is tied to MAGA that should not be ignored by people like living in countries like Canada is that, and I've mentioned on the podcast before, like MAGA has decided that they don't want like this globalist regime anymore. Like they don't want asymmetric tariff regime that actually impacts their jobs in an asymmetric manner compared to like other similar jobs in places like Western Europe, for example. So I think that's clearly what he's doing. He's trying to get a better deal for the American worker and for the American economy. And if this ends with many of these countries agreeing to lowering their tariffs on the U.S., then I think that we're going to go back to base case. I can see the 10% tariff baseline being something that remains because like, the USA does have this $36 trillion debt problem. So perhaps Trump is trying to implement some kind of VAT in the sneakiest way possible to try to get some. And then there's also a chance that you would introduce some kind of VAT tax, which would be called tariffs in this case. And then you might have some revenue neutral tax cuts on the other end, which Trump has kind of hinted at. And then the whole uncertainty thesis is interesting because like they certainly want to get interest rates around 3%. I think one of the problems with this narrative is that people are now on the market predicting they're trying to get interest rates down to like 1%. And it's like, no, he's not gonna like cause a Great Depression level like scare to get interest rates down. I think he just wants a little bit of if that is true, I think that it's fairly coordinated. I don't think it's just coordinated by Trump. I feel like this is a bigger thing where this is something the US government often does with like debt ceiling fights and stuff to try to get some uncertainty up, to try to get people to buy their bonds. So I think they do similar things to this all the time. But yeah, this is potentially part of their game plan for sure. So overall, I think that it's a problem when people on the market start to like take like 44% tariffs and extrapolate it 10 years and say that Trump's going to cause like a 35% contraction in the economy. It's just absurd. It's not going to happen. We know he's a bit of a goof and like how we know the art of the deal style negotiation. He likes to ramp it up to 11 and then bring it down to 3. So that's kind of what I think is going to happen. I think that like the tariffs that were announced the other day were unexpected by the markets. They didn't expect it to hit this many countries, and they didn't. When he said a few weeks ago that he would like it wouldn't be that high, and then they actually made them pretty high. So I guess it's just like a negotiating mechanism to try to force everybody to the table, and hopefully, I think what Trump is hoping for is that he gets a better deal out of it, where a lot of the trade barriers, some of them being non-tariff trade barriers, start to go away for American exporters.
I sure hope that he's got a plan going into this. I feel like you guys are all very confident that Trump has got this overarching master plan that he's working to get those rates down, and he's this is all for the good of America. Well, I feel like I tend to be a lot more skeptical of the motivations and route that is being undertaken. Like I wouldn't be that surprised if this is a scenario where there's also a lot of insider trading going on, where Trump is making it known that this is his plan, and then he's incentivizing buddies to hold cash and buy the dip kind of thing. I wouldn't be that surprised with this scenario like that, because like I do have a lot of skepticism, particularly ever since the Trump coin, which from my perspective is, was essentially just a cash grab, so I do have some skepticism on that front, because I feel like he's just kind of, to some extent, he's been making volatility for the sake of making volatility. It feels like, which, maybe maybe there is a larger plan going into this, but I do have some skepticism that there isn't a personal gain aspect to this, if not for Trump, then for others. I'm hoping that he is, in fact, using this as a tool to motivate people to motivate countries to reduce their tariffs and like bring them to the table quickly, so that this gets resolved, and we don't actually end up having America where they're paying where they have these enormous tariffs on everyone. I think that from an American perspective, like the level of tariffs that were implemented is unsustainable in the long run for the vast majority of the industries that'll be affected, which is going to be a lot of them. So I don't think that in the long run these tariffs can be kept on. So I do kind of feel like this must be just a negotiation tactic. If it's not a negotiation tactic, and these are actually being intended to be kept on, I feel like that is going to severely hamper America in the long run, because just the sheer additional costs for pivoting all these supply chains back to America is basically just like a multi-year process. It's not going to be something that would even happen in the next 5 years, even 10, 15, 20. Like, we're not going to be suddenly having all of these supply chains come back. So that means that people will just be eating the costs for the time frame between that, which will reduce American consumers' ability to consume, which is pretty much the main thing that they're known for. Is the Americans love to consume, and they consume more than anyone else, and that's the real reason why companies really want to be selling to Americans, is just because you sell to Americans, you'll sell way more than anywhere else in the world. So I think that if he's using it as a short-term tactic, this can be something that can force countries to bow to the weight of the US. I think the big risk from my perspective, though, is if other countries kind of reject the US as a result of this, and build out routes to avoid them. Again, that'll be very difficult, since the US is the most powerful economy and the reserve currency, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. And so on that front, there is a risk that the US could put themselves in an awkward position if there is a significant backlash to these kind of action. Now, that being said, in a lot of respects, the US having such low tariffs for as long as it has been unusual. So the likelihood that they unusual, I mean, by in the grand scheme of things, like in the past, countries had tariffs at a much higher rate just in general. It's only been like the last 50, I guess it's probably more than that, less like 65, 75 years or so, where tariffs have been really brought down to really, really, really low numbers. So it's not like I wouldn't surprise me that much if that scenario didn't happen, but it's just I think that it would be foolish to not consider that to be a possibility. So when it comes right down to it, my position is pretty much just like I sure hope Trump knows what he's doing, and I sure hope he stops what he's doing soon, so that instead of stock market go down, stock market can go up again, please.
It's like that moment when you've hired like a random heart surgeon that you don't know like how good he is, that you've never heard of, from like a university, who graduated from a medical school that you've never heard of, who's like just operating, and he's using all these like unconventional tactics, which he claims 100% is going to work, but you have no idea. Right? I feel like that's kind of the moment that we're in right now. And to give you maybe some comfort, I was listening to Tom Lee from Funstrat on like a X Space today talking about this. And what he was implying, I'm like paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly what he said, but like he said that, you know, the fact that these tariff rates are so absurd should actually maybe give you some comfort that, you know, that Trump's plan is not to just like permanently have these tariffs on for 4 years and just like, you know, try to like completely isolate the US forever, right? Like the fact that he set these absurd rates is like a negotiation tactic to just, you know, bring to light a fire under the butts of like all these different countries to bring them to the negotiating table so that he can get a better deal, right? It's kind of like, it's again, I hate to say it because it's overused, but it's art of the deal, right? Like it's exactly what he was talking about in his book, where, you know, let's say if you're trying to sell a house and this house is probably only worth $1 million, but then you like list it for like $10 million, and then people go like, oh, that's absurd, like that's way overvalued, I'm not gonna pay it. But then you like set an anchor for that price, and then you're like, okay, well, today only it's gonna be 50% off, it's gonna be $5 million. And then the people are like, no way, like even $5 million too much. This house, I feel like it's only worth, you know, $2 million, right? But in fact, the house is actually only worth $1 million, and you're like trying to pretend that you're playing a hardball deal, and then you're like, okay, fine, like $2 million, I'm selling it to you for like basement prices, you know, and then everyone walks away feeling like they got a good deal, but in fact, it was the seller, in this case, Trump, who wins in the end. So maybe that's what he's doing. But Amr, I see you have your hand raised. I'm gonna.
Sorry, I was just gonna say the provocation, like the way Trump style, like it's always about like putting his opposition off base. Like he wants to get everybody off base.
Yeah, and I do believe that that's what's going on. So, you know, I don't see, again, I agree with you, Sunil, that I don't think that these tariffs are gonna just like, you know, be permanent and stay on, because I think everybody, even the people who are super pro-Trump, if you just understand anything about economics, it's pretty clear that these are not going to stay for 4 years. Like that's just that'll completely wreck everything. And I don't think that Trump wants that to be his legacy, right? To start like the next Great Depression or anything like that. Like in fact, I think he's actively trying to do the opposite, right? Like this is his last term. He needs to, you know, build his legacy, and to build his legacy, he really wants to ensure that he leaves a good impression and starts a new golden age. I genuinely think that he wants to do that. But if he actually, you know, ends up sinking America into the next Great Depression for the next 10 years, that's going to be like really bad for his legacy too, right? Yeah, Amr, it's your turn.
Yeah, I will open by saying that I have, one, an extremely low opinion of Trump in general, but I'll try to be as charitable and as objective as I can be. And that, two, I do believe that tariffs can be a good negotiation tactic. I don't think using tariffs to get concessions is the problem. What I think the biggest problem here is that Trump doesn't really have plans, in my opinion. He has concepts of plans and sort of the ideal that he would love to see, where where the US is not getting ripped off, where the golden age is at hand, and where all countries sort of recognize America as the superpower of the world. That, I think, is what he genuinely believes. I have no doubt about that. And I also have no doubt that that's what he's trying to do to the best of his abilities. The part that I think is misguided in his strategy is that the way he goes about it is too chaotic to be good government. There's this thing where it's the economy relies on trust. If you break the trust of an economy, it doesn't matter how good the fundamentals are. People won't trade, people won't go to the markets, the economy will crash. And I've seen comparisons earlier where people were comparing the numbers, like where people were like sharing a theory that they think what they did to get those tariff numbers that he had on his graphs was to simply round the trade deficits that the US has with each individual country, and then half those and call it a nice tariff. I think the problem here, though, is that it's illogical. Like I also agree with what you guys mentioned, that there's no way he's going to keep it like this for long. He's going to try and get some concessions out of it to like lower them down, and quite a few countries will actually go through and give the US concessions. The problem, though, is that in the short term, we're seeing all of this chaos in the financial market, and that chaos and his decisions have been escalating over time. Like with every passing month, he comes up with another crazy idea for a negotiation tactic, goes through with it, gets something out of it, and then the markets don't even get a chance to stabilize before another crazy idea comes out. And then at some point, what I worry about is that maybe the Trump and his team is not keeping in mind is that the strong position of the US is not guaranteed forever. I suspect their two goals here is to ideally, one, like you guys mentioned, like reduce barriers, and two, to onshore as much of their supply chain into the US. But what Tristan mentions, is that even possible? And even if it is possible, how much will it cost? Like, are the Americans people willing to bear with the costs, given that one of the reasons he got elected was that inflation was too high, cost of living was too high. And if Americans can't keep up with these added costs in the short or medium term, will the long term even be as prosperous as he hopes it would be? So that's my doubt. Like, I think even if I am charitable and I think that he is going to get something out of it, and definitely will, I think the more he relies on such tactics, the less effective it will be, and the more likely we are to see a sort of isolation of the US, whether or not he won. And is that going to make America great? I personally don't think so. I think what made America great in the first place was its ability to maintain good relationships with allies and neutral nations. But yeah, it remains to be seen. I struggle to see anything more than this art of the deal type of strategy that works better with private businesses, where the only risks are really what happens to your own private investment, as opposed to an entire nation where almost every sector relies on the type of decisions that the government makes. That's where I'll leave it at that.
Like, one thing I'll say is that the whole theory about him domesticating supply chains I think that's probably a part of the general tactic. And I think that part of it is that, like, yeah, he goes and he's attacking other countries and like doing the 51st state stuff and all that stuff and pissing everybody off and knocking us off base. He's like not just provoking us, he's provoking the American companies that like send a lot of their supply chains overseas and stuff. So I think that is a part of the tactic where he's like, he's saying Canada this, Canada that, but he's going to General Motors is the one who's putting 50% of their factories in Mexico and Canada this, Mexico that. Is actually pointed at General Motors saying, get some factories back in America. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm just saying, I think that's part of it for sure. I think that he probably will get some big investments in America. I don't think he's going to get like 100% of the supply chains back. It's going to take, as Tristan said, it's going to take like 15 years to do that. So I don't see that happening, but yeah, it's probably part of the plan to indirectly attack the American companies that have been putting jobs overseas for 30 years or whatever the talking point is. The other thing is, so like there is like a darker theory to this, which is that Trump is using this to keep his base happy. Like, he's coming out of the gates, he got elected, and he's going to the base. He's like, I'm going after other countries, and I'm saving jobs, and I'm doing this for Americans. They're very happy about this, and people like us, like who are on Wall Street, are pretty pissed off because our network's going down. And then, like, in the end, if like all the tariffs go away, or he gets like some of the tariff barriers from other countries down, then what happens but then Trump says he's going to keep the 10% VAT tax. Was just this like a secret plan for Trump to implement a VAT tax on the American public and to like do all these theatrics and not actually raise tariffs in the end, with exception to the 10% VAT tax, which is kind of the darker theory where Trump is just using the emotions of his base. And I think that's certainly a part of the. I think that's certainly a part of it. I actually feel like the 10% baseline tariffs are not going away ever.
Yeah, and on that note, let's move on to the second part of the story, because there is a second part to this, which is talking about the financial markets kind of melting down because of the Trump tariffs and stuff. Let's talk about Bitcoin, because that's kind of the main thing that at least this podcast has been focused on. And Bitcoin's actually held up fairly well, relatively speaking, all things considered. I mean, it's definitely held up a lot better than other cryptocurrencies like, Ethereum, Solana. Those have just gotten completely destroyed. But Bitcoin's actually holding fairly well despite the Trump tariff threats. It did drop from like 87, 86K all the way down to 81 something earlier today. But, that's not abnormal for Bitcoin to drop that much in a single day, and considering that it's still above 80K, it's actually not that bad. But with all this kind of talk about tariffs and, the markets getting nuked and all that stuff, what if we're just overthinking it? Like, what if tariffs, this kind of tariff talk, is only a small part of what's been driving the Bitcoin price at the very least? So this is kind of a theory that I've seen posted by Colin Talks Crypto on X. So these are his charts. Credits to him for putting this together. But what this Xer Twitter person, Twitter channel, Colin was talking about was he actually, this wasn't his discovery, but this is a theory that I've seen, that Bitcoin price is very closely correlated to global M2 money supply. So if you don't know what M2 is, M1 is just cash, like physical cash, like if you have a $5 bill in your wallet or something. M2 is cash and cash equivalent. So if you have money in your bank account, it includes checking accounts, and I'm not sure if it includes like money market funds and stuff like that, but it's just like liquid money, but it doesn't have to be physical. It could be in your checking account. So M2 is usually like a really good measure of liquid money supply, just how much liquidity there is in the market. And what people have found was that Bitcoin's price is very closely correlated to the global M2 money supply. So if you add up all the M2 supply that's in the world, that's increase it, and it increases or decreases by central banks printing money or withdrawing liquidity. So if you just add up all the global M2 money supply, it's very correlated to the Bitcoin price. So this is one that's with offset. So the idea is that if liquidity increases, if M2 increases, it takes a certain amount of time for that liquidity to flow into things like Bitcoin or just financial markets in general. And if you offset the money supply that's already happened by 77 days, you can see this chart that the correlation is pretty high with Bitcoin. But what's even higher of a correlation is if you offset it by 108 days. So 77 days is just over 2 months. And 108 days is another month away. So we're kind of struggling between whether the Bitcoin price is correlated to the money supply offset by 77 days or 108 days. again, it's looking like maybe the 108 days ones is pretty. It's more accurate because as you can see, I've included the chart. The 108-day offset does show that Bitcoin is going to drop if it continues to be correlated with the M2 money supply. That there is a drop that's being predicted by the M2. Now, of course, this chart has no idea of the Trump tariffs, right? Like this is all factoring in, like this is all not factoring in like any of the tariff announcements that have already happened, because once again, this is offset by 108 days. So this is stuff that's already happened 108 days ago that's just projected onto the Bitcoin price. So we do see that if it's 108 days offset, there is a drop of Bitcoin's price. And maybe this whole like tariff announcement was just a coincidence that Bitcoin was going to drop anyways, regardless of whether there was a tariff announcement or not, and it drops because the M2 money supply offset by 108 days that dropped. So I don't know. This is a theory that I've seen, and by the way, the reason why it's important is because if it does continue to be correlated with the M2 money supply, if it's 77 days, then that means we should be kind of blasting off already, or within the next like week or so, literally, that Bitcoin is going to just start blasting off. And as you can see from the chart, it's kind of like just pretty much up only for the next 3 months. If the 77-day offset is true. If the 108-day offset is true, then we have to wait another month. Then that means that Bitcoin is probably going to chop for another month, and then May 1st, it's going to be up only. So what do you guys think of this theory, first of all? And do you guys, put any credence to it, or do you guys think that this is just a coincidence? Because, the correlation is very high, so I personally don't think this is a coincidence. I think that it actually does matter. But I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this Bitcoin price correlation with M2 money supply, because this is like kind of the last piece of opium that we can huff. Because like, if this doesn't work, then I don't know what's going to happen, right? Like if it doesn't, if the 108-day offset hits, if it's still like Bitcoin is at the same price as it is by the end of May, then it will suck. Like that's all I'm gonna say, right? And lastly, before I actually pass it off to you guys, I have this chart of this, theory of a V-shaped recovery, and this is posted by a user named Cena21st on X. But basically, this is like kind of an idea of how Bitcoin could make a recovery. And Bitcoin is kind of correlated with the Nasdaq, so maybe it could say relatively similar things about the stock market as well, where we already experienced kind of the early parts of the early crash, right? Like the tariffs thing became kind of real, and everybody kind of had a rude awakening to the tariff inflationary shock. But then we had the Liberation Day, which turned into Liquidation Day. And then we had, the bad effects, like people are pricing in the bad effects of the Liberation Day tariff announcement. But then once we get to closer to the bottom, you can see that we just heard a report that maybe Elon will be leaving Doge soon because they've, chainsawed everything that they could. And then now it's like time for the scalpel. But then now it's like, Tesla stock has crashed too much, so Tesla needs to Tesla shareholders are trying to like recall Elon Musk to get him to come back, because like the stock is gonna go nowhere without him. And yeah, like there's gonna be pressure on Elon to leave Doge, so the remainder of the spending cuts won't be substantial, and that might actually be a good thing for the market, because the market is like, oh, we don't have this like crazy guy who's like cutting everything. And now we can, maybe have some parts of our government that Doge won't like completely, just cut half the employees and stuff. And then we have the Fed. I talked about the Fed rate cut earlier. Now there's like one quarter or 1/3 chance of a rate cut, 25 basis point rate cut in May. So maybe rate cuts will be resuming soon. And then after that, we get some certainty around the tariffs, and then we get maybe a dovish Jay Powell, and then we get a little bit of sideline money flooding back in from institutional investors. And then in May or June, we're going to start to hear news about the Trump tax cuts, which is probably going to be good. And assuming that oil prices don't just like skyrocket, which if there's recession fears, oil's probably going to go down, right? So assuming that oil prices continue to go down, then inflation's going to get less, right? There's going to be pressure relieved from inflation, which gives the Fed even more leeway to cut rates. And then you have all these, Congress might finally get their act together closer to the end of summer to pass some deregulation bills. And the debt ceiling thing, eventually it's going to have to be negotiated, but maybe we get a resolution on that. Probably going to kick the can down the road again, right? Like as they always do. So once we get those pieces of news back, then perhaps, we get a little bit more certainty. A dovish Fed, liquidity is going to go up and Bitcoin's going to, make new all-time highs again. So at least that's the theory. I know it seems like just I'm huffing total hopium because we're maybe hopefully we're at the bottom, but I don't know, right? But we've certainly come down a lot. So what do you guys think of all of these, M2 theory, M2 global money supply theory, and all these, this graph about the V-shaped recovery? Do you think it's going to happen? And yeah, just your opinions on where the market is headed in the next, remainder of the year, let's say.
I mean, I'm a firm believer that Bitcoin only moves one way or another because of global liquidity for the most part. I don't think it's only global liquidity. There's a lot of other things that are going on in the market and why people are buying things. And it also has to do with the fundamentals of Bitcoin. But fundamentally, Bitcoin is either very correlated with liquidity or it's very uncorrelated. And there are times where Bitcoin becomes very correlated with the NASDAQ, which means it's also very correlated with M2 money supply. So I think we're definitely in a time period where we're very highly correlated with the NASDAQ, which means that if money starts to print and M2 starts to expand, the NASDAQ should expand, which means that Bitcoin should expand. And that's kind of what I'm expecting to happen coming soon. I think that the chart, I don't know if Bitcoin is going to follow the chart that perfectly. My feeling is that we're going to blast off when hedge funds decide they have enough certainty in the market to start deploying capital that they have been planning on deploying anyways. A lot of these institutional investors will deploy capital on a quarterly basis. And basically what we've seen is a lot of capital got pulled back during the Trump bump in November. And generally, when that happens, it means that there has to be a market correction. And the what causes the market correction is usually the market's looking for uncertainty to decide to sell. They're looking for reasons to sell. So Trump gave them the reason to sell with the tariffs. I do agree it's connected. But if there were no tariffs, it would have been something else, like the debt ceiling. Institutional investors would have found a way to fled to safety, waiting for certainty in the market to return so they could make money after the Trump bump kind of dissipates. So that's kind of what I think. Is I don't think it's gonna be this deterministic based on the chart. I think any day now, institutional investors are going to start deploying capital away from bonds and towards equities, and that's usually when Bitcoin starts ripping pretty hard. And that's kind of what I think is going to happen. But I think it's credible information. You're clearly seeing a model here where Bitcoin is impacted by global liquidity, and there clearly has been a drawdown of global liquidity in the last couple of months that's probably impacted Bitcoin, and it's perfectly correlated to the impact that's happened to a lot of stocks, including especially risk assets like NASDAQ stocks. The second chart I think is way too deterministic for me to take it seriously. Sorry to the author of the chart. I think that the majority of the things that he's writing here are the market does not trade on this level of certainty. Like I just don't believe that. I even think some of the things that are posted in the chart are just flat wrong. Like if Doge was toothless and had no substantial cuts, I think that'd be horrible for the markets. I actually think Doge is one of the things that's driving expectations for yields down. So if you like take away this expectation that like Elon might be able to like bend the curve on spending, I'm not saying he's going to balance the budget, but bend the curve, like make a difference. That's like that somebody can report on in the Treasury Department. If that doesn't happen, that's really bad, I think, for global liquidity. I think that actually brings a lot of uncertainty to the market. I don't think it's a good thing if Elon fails. I think that shows that's data for the American public that like paying off the deficit is like never going to happen, and that's like enough data for people to start making other long-term financial decisions. So I think that the idea that like the Fed, the U.S. government's never going to make any progress on paying off their debt is good for the markets is just absurd. That's personally what I think. So I don't think that's the case, but I do believe that like where a V-shaped recovery is in the cards. So the chart is the picture is going to be right anyways, because a V-shaped recovery is always in the charts when you have this kind of options reversal and you have this kind of uncertainty introduced in the market. Generally, when the market comes back, it comes back pretty strong. And I think that the setup for like lower rates, lower inflation, and Trump ending the uncertainty is actually a pretty good setup. It's just, I guess this is the last big trade thing he wants to do. He's done with Mexico and Canada. He's moving on to Europe and China for the most part right now. We'll see where he gets with that. But overall, yes, I do believe global M2 is improving, and I do believe that's going to be very good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I forgot to include the chart in the docket, but there's also one thing that we should watch called the Dollar Strength Index, the DXY, or Dixie, as some people call it, and that measures the US dollar's value against a basket of other major global currencies. Basically, the higher the index, the stronger the US dollar is relative to other currencies. And one of Trump's goals is to make the dollar weaker so that he can export more stuff, right? That's kind of like part of his tariff strategy. And the funny thing is, global M2 money supply, that's represented in US dollars. So if nothing else changes and the Dixie falls, which is what Trump wants and what he's trying to actively achieve, then M2 will rise, just like everything else being equal, right? Like just if the Dixie falls, nothing else needs to happen for the M2 to rise. Of course, like everything else is happening, and other global or the central banks around the globe, they are printing money still. So that also does help with the M2. So I think that M2 is going to go up, and I think that that's going to, and it has been going up, right? If we just look at the charts. So I think that that's going to be good for Bitcoin going forward, where the US dollar is going to fall, and global central banks all around the world are going to be either cutting rates or printing money or both. So yeah, that's my opinion. Does anyone else want to chime in on what they think of the M2 stuff that I talked about?
Yeah, I want to jump in here on M2 because I think it really is just a big factor with fiat currency that more money, there's not more Bitcoin. So the more money there is, the more Bitcoin can run up in price because, again, we can't generate more Bitcoin than what there's currently being generated and what is currently in the mix. So that's really, really why it can basically be whatever price, like the dollar value of Bitcoin doesn't really matter. It's basically just being determined by how much people want it and how much people don't want fiat. And I would say that there's going to be a lot more people are adopting. I mean, we can see it from all the news that we've had. There's been a lot of adoption of Bitcoin in general, and like there's been way more willingness to use it and have it as a major currency and a reserve, like kind of being put into reserves as well. So I would say that the idea that the growth of the money M2 supply, and especially because of the fact that Bitcoin is global, right? So that's I feel like that's why the global M2 supply is much more indicative of the growth of the price of it, because at the end of the day, you know, I can buy it in Canada, someone else can buy it in Hong Kong, someone else can buy it in Ireland. Like there's no borders that are determining what currency is going into it, or being exchanged for it. So the more money that's in the mix, just in general, the more is out there that can be used to purchase Bitcoin. So I think that's kind of where I'm seeing it. It makes sense that it would be relatively correlated. We'll see about the blast off point if it actually happens, because I feel like I've been counting down the days for a blast off point for months now. So if it could have done it, you know, 3 months ago, that would have been great. But alas, hopefully this is an indicator that we are about to start moving back up again, especially with the additional rate news, given that there's a significantly higher chance of a rate cut than there was previously. You know, we'll have to see what Powell says, given that he already betrayed me in December. So I don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully it'll be positive news across the board. Yeah, I think we're like, it feels like we've got everything set up for a good Bitcoin run. It just hasn't happened yet. So instead of sitting here patting each other on the back and being like, yeah, man, we did great, good on you, man, we're sitting here going, why? Because all we've done is watch ourselves grow in December and be like, yeah, it's like vindication. I know what I was talking about. And now it's like sitting here, you know, a few months later, like looking at your portfolio being like, what have I done? So hopefully we can get back to the celebration once more, with the Bitcoin price returning its upward trend instead of bouncing around on, you know, it sat there, bounced around on 95-ish K for like a month and a half. Now it's bouncing around in the 80s. Like, come on, man. Let's sit back up there. So that's kind of where I'm at.
No, I totally get what you're saying there, Tristan. I just think that like most of like 80% of investing is literally just managing your emotions, right? Like when stocks and Bitcoin goes up, like it doesn't mean that you're a genius. And when stocks and Bitcoin go down, it doesn't mean that you're a failure, right? Because maybe like, and this is partly my fault too, like I should have been watching the global liquidity index more closely in retrospect, and I will watch it very closely going forward. I feel like, you know, all this time, all this, you know, kind of frustration that we've experienced over the past few months, or in all the jubilation too when it was going up, maybe it was just tracking global liquidity all this time, right? Like we were celebrating over nothing. Like we're celebrating that we were geniuses when in fact it's like it went up because global liquidity went down. And then now we're like lambasting ourselves for being idiots, when all that's happened is that the global liquidity went down. Like maybe we're too nice on ourselves when it's going up and we're too harsh on ourselves when it's going down. So I feel like in retrospect, this is kind of my conclusion over, you know, just kind of watching my portfolio over the past, you know, few months to a year. But yeah, anyways, I've spoken a lot. Amr, it's your turn to chime in.
I like both in the graphs and just logically more money, like more liquidity makes sense that it would increase the price of Bitcoin. It just looking at it, there's clearly like it reaches a certain point where there's really a gap in the correlation. And so the question is like, is this gap something intrinsic? Like, is there sort of a level where once Bitcoin reaches, at least right now, investors are not willing to spend that much more? I will say, like, I haven't been investing in Bitcoin for a long time, so I don't have the emotional attachment. Or I'm sad I'm still very new to all of this. But I would expect that Bitcoin, just looking at it, I would expect it would go a little bit up. I think really the big threat is that whether or not there is something that undermines the value proposition of Bitcoin as an investment asset to anybody looking to use their liquidity. And I don't know where they would throw their money right now. So yeah, that's where I am.
To be a proper Bitcoiner, I just want to point out your comment, Andy, where you said that like now you're wondering whether like your successes of investing are just related to global liquidity. And I think that from a Bitcoiner standpoint, that is always the case. All investors are successful because they think that they're making all the right purchases of assets, whether they're homes or stocks, but it's actually just related to global liquidity going up or down. And like, yeah, like there's a lot of people who are like, I'm a genius. I started investing in 2008 and I'm killing it. I'm like destroying my parents' returns that they got with the same age. It's like, it's also when global liquidity went through the roof. So that's what happens. I'm just pointing that out, that like your feeling is actually true for everyone that's involved in investing.
Yeah, and I just hope it continues the correlation, right? Like in the back of my head, like everything makes sense, right? Like when I think about it, but in the back of my head, there's always that like small fear of everything. Even like I'm a deep believer in Bitcoin, just like everyone else who's a Bitcoiner, but in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, what if like this is the one time when I need Bitcoin to go up the most, where liquidity goes up but Bitcoin just somehow doesn't, right? Like I know it doesn't make sense, and there's like probably I feel like a less than 1% chance of that happening if like M2 totally takes off and just Bitcoin just continues to do nothing. But yeah, it's just again, I feel like it's managing emotions, right? Like I said earlier,
yeah.
Where yeah, you just got to hang in there, and hopefully if the 108 days is correct, then we should be blasting off May 1st. But maybe the 77-day offset is not dead yet, because we didn't drop below 80K, even though the news around the tariffs was really bad, and Bitcoin's actually holding up well. But yeah, hopefully we get some positive movement within the next month or so. So anyways, let's move on to our final story of tonight, if you guys have nothing further to add, and then we'll wrap it up. So the final story of tonight, we're moving back home to Canada and talking a little bit more about Canadian politics. And I hope you guys are not sick of eating Canadian politics for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have a whole fridge full in the back because it is election season. So there's got to be something election related every week, I've decided. So the final story of tonight is a story about the Liberals. So I'm not sure if you guys have been following the campaign of each of the parties, but the Liberals have had, I feel like, quite a few gaffes recently. We talked about like the Mark Carney saying that we'd supply the U.S. with most of their semiconductors, which was like a bizarre statement that's totally untrue. And then we had like Carney also also getting mad at a reporter for asking him a question on asset disclosures. I'm not sure if you guys saw that story. I think we actually talked about it, I think, on either last week or the week before. I don't remember. But here is another kind of story about the Liberals, where there's this Liberal MP called Paul Chiang, who suggested that his opponent, who's also ethnically Chinese Canadian, but his opponent is like the conservative guy, and he's the Liberal MP, that his opponent should be handed over to the CCP because the CCP has a bounty on his head. So his competitor, Joe Tang, I think his name is, he's like a Hong Kong independence activist, and that's why the CCP really doesn't like him. And the CCP put a 1 million Hong Kong dollar reward bounty on his head, which 1 million Hong Kong dollars is worth about 128,000 US dollars. So it's quite a nice chunk of change. Where Paul Chiang basically suggested that, like, hey, like, this person's like a really sketchy dude, and there's a government that has that's like, he's a fugitive, right? And the CCP wants to like arrest him, and they put a bounty on him. If you just deliver him to the nearest Chinese consulate, then you can go collect your bounty. So this is the word for word the CTV article that just announced this story, which was Liberal incumbent Paul Chiang will not be running. So this is the latest development, that he was forced to drop out of the race because of these comments. So Paul Chiang will not be running in the ongoing federal election after suggesting earlier this year that people should try and claim a Chinese bounty on a conservative candidate. In this statement posted to X late on Monday night, Chiang called the federal election uniquely important, saying that he does not want to be there to be distractions in this critical moment. And he says, that's why I'm standing aside as our 2025 candidate in our community of Markham Unionville. So it's funny that he posted this like a few hours before midnight on March 31st, so that, you know, people are saying that he did this to like make it not seem like an April Fool's joke, that he was actually dropping out. So anyways, this is only part of the story though, because, you know, it's these type of things happen, and I'm not saying that these things only happen to the liberals. I'm sure that there's been numerous instances where conservative candidates have said really questionable things and were forced to drop out. This is not like that unique of a story. However, what I found unique was Mark Carney's reaction to it, where initially he defended Paul Chiang, and he, you know, refused to call for his dropping out, and Chiang ended up dropping out anyways. But I'm sure there's pressure applied to him privately, but at least publicly on the campaign trail, Carney was like, you know, he made a mistake. He, you know, had a lapse of judgment. He shouldn't have said that, and he's since apologized to. And he's a man of character. We're standing behind him. And basically, that's Carney's reaction. And then eventually, when the story got bigger, you know, surprise, surprise, Chiang dropped out. So the way that Carney handled this was really bad, in my opinion. Where he should have come out, like, you know, demanding that Chiang drop out in the first place, instead of trying to defend him, because this is, like, in my opinion, a pretty egregious comment that he said, that like a Canadian citizen and his political rival should be handed over to the CCP for arrest, where, you know, they are actually, if somebody actually kidnapped him and threw him into the Chinese consulate, like, he'd be, like, you know, tortured or whatever, right? Because it's the CCP. We are talking about the CCP here. So yeah, this is pretty bad, in my opinion, and I really didn't like the way that Carney reacted to it. However, so far it doesn't seem like it's really affected Carney that much, because his polling numbers kept on going up. So I just saw the latest Polling Canada projection, and the Liberals are over 200 seats in the latest projection, just on average. And yeah, it's quite shocking that, and it's also shocking that the NDP are down to 3 seats in this. The NDP is getting absolutely destroyed if these results are anywhere close to what the actual result will be. So, you know, my question to you guys is, first of all, what do you guys think of this story? Do you guys agree with me that, like, Carney just totally messed up the response to it, to this, you know, Paul Chiang scandal? And second of all, if it was like as bad as I'm saying it is, like why is the Liberals still surging in the polls, right? Because this poll, like, this average estimate came out on April 2nd, so this was after this story had already kind of blew up and unfolded, but it doesn't seem like it's really affecting the Liberals. So, why is Mark Carney Teflon man? Like, it seems like nothing is sticking to him when in fact there's been quite a few things, in my opinion, that's been somewhat alarming that's happened with regards to Carney. So yeah, just would be excited to get what you guys' thoughts are on this.
I think to answer your question, I mean, I don't think it'll be ridiculous to disagree with you that it is absurd that after hearing about such comments, his first instinct was to defend him and stand behind him. I know some people say like it's a joke, it's a bit edgy or whatever, and maybe a private citizen making such a joke in bad taste is fine. But an elected politician making that about his rival of all people is dangerous. It's the type of polarization and this increasing radicalism that is really threatening our politics. And to your point that this is not unique to the Liberals, and that kind of, to me, answers why it didn't affect their performance in the polls, is that a few days ago, within the same news cycle, more or less, and I was just looking it up, there was a conservative candidate who exited the race as well, named Mark McKenzie, who had made jokes about publicly hanging Trudeau at some point. And once again, it's like, if you are representing a party, if you're a politician, you shouldn't be making these types of comments, even as jokes. And that's kind of thing. Like, I think if now you were, like, I try to put myself in the shoes of like an average voter who was considering Carney. You hear that, it sounds absurd, and then within a few days, you found out that the Conservatives also had an exact same case, more or less. Then you say, like, oh, well, I'm not supporting Carney because he stood by him. Well, the kind of like the Conservative Party ignored these comments until they came to light as well. And on the flip side, it's also true. Like, some people who are like committed conservatives will look at the news and be like, well, a few days before that, Paul Chiang said this and the Liberals stood by him. But like, the bigger danger to me then is that the more each party is willing to tolerate this type of language at all, or this type of threat or jokes or whatever they want to, propagandize it as, for lack of a better word, I think it sets a bad precedent. I think really the part that truly helps the Liberals in this election is that a lot of Canadians really don't like the character of Believer, and that's nothing short of a huge mistake by Carney, like the Paul Chiang thing. If it was the only thing that happened, I don't think it would budge their likelihood of winning at least a minority. The Conservatives have been fumbling their campaign since Trump's tariffs, and they haven't really gotten an answer to Mark Carney's appeal to the average Canadian. This well-educated guy, well-spoken, calm, sort of like progressive, but not too much. That sort of image is what a lot of Canadians like. And when Believer, his whole attitude being this angry guy, pointing out all the mistakes, like, having all these slogans about Trudeau, once that target was no longer there, it really weakened his appeal to a lot of the anti-Trudeau people. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how accurate the polls are. The fact that the NDP is crashing hard is not surprising. I think it speaks to all of the strategic voting that you mentioned earlier, and Jagmeet being sort of too tied to Trudeau. I don't think that's going to help them change their fortunes anytime soon. But I think that was the last remark I had. Justin?
I thought what you were saying was pretty interesting, regarding like Pierre being maybe a little bit him losing appeal after Trudeau is gone. and that Carney seems to be a lot harder for them to stick something on. And I think on that front, like Carney, I feel like Canadians in general are more left leaning as a country. And I think that's why people are really rallying around Carney. I don't think it's actually like a Carney is great scenario. It's a we hated Justin and we don't really care about Jag B. So it's either Carney or well, we don't. They didn't. I think they don't. I don't think there's a humongous amount of love for Pierre the way. So since there's not like a big real attachment to Pierre that he generated before, what he really had was a hatred of Trudeau backing him, and I feel like at this point it's like the Liberals are desperately trying to convince everyone that Carney is not Trudeau. Whether or not you believe that Carney is not Trudeau, that's really up to you. It's from my perspective, it's like if he builds his party full of all the people who are in Trudeau's cabinet and party, kind of seems like it's probably just Trudeau in a hat, different hat. Ooh, put on my cowboy hat, and I'm suddenly a different person. Entirely different party, completely different now. We're going to be much more center instead of, pretty left. Which I feel like the big disconnect is that, people tend to be more socially liberal in Canada. I feel like there is a more of a fiscal conservative portion of the population who did not find Trudeau very appealing. But now that there's Carney kind of trying to position themselves in a middler ground, I feel like there's more of a appeal on that front. So I think that Pierre's finding himself in a hard spot to really differentiate himself from Carney, because Carney is just honestly just grabbing anything good from Pierre and being like, haha, my idea too. And so I think that the Canadians we're really craving a more fiscally conservative yet socially liberal leader, and they're latching onto Carney because he's from I suspect the majority of people's perspective, the closest thing they're going to get. He's a central banker. That he led the country through the 2008 crisis. Definitely, he definitely led so much. But that the perception is that he had some impact on managing that crisis. Which from my perspective, how much he actually did is debatable. But I just think that it's really more so about them wanting a new someone who is more responsible at the helm. And Pierre was really good at convincing them that he was better than Trudeau, but he's not so good at convincing them that he's a more responsible option to when there's a liberal option that seems more responsible, even if it remains to be seen whether or not he actually will be.
I just wanted to add, I agree with everything you said. I think a lot of Canadians are really hoping that Carney is that fundamental shift towards the socially progressive, fiscally conservative side. I agree also with you that I think it will be disappointing given just how similar the cabinets are. But I think the other thing that is really getting in Poilievre's way is how Trump-like he is in the minds of many Canadians, and even in the way that he has presented himself leading up until now. He tried to capture a lot of the same energy without going to the same level of Trump actions, I guess. And it seems to have rubbed off a lot of people the wrong way. but they were willing to deal with it as long as he's not Trudeau, or as long as it's not the Liberals. But now that you have things like Trump's threats and the tariffs, and then Danielle Smith going on her own and trying to promote how much believers like Trump and how much they'll get along great. It's in these, it is truly like I struggle to even imagine the Liberals becoming anything other than the official opposition under a new leader. But with the way they have mishandled their association with Trump and the way Trump has acted on his own, it kind of created that perfect storm that it seems really, really unlikely that the Conservatives will get something out of this election.
Yeah, I'll address the Paul Chiang thing first. I mean, it was just obviously in bad taste, and there's also allegations of foreign interference in Canadians' elections. So it's I don't know. It's just a no-brainer for Carney to just pull his candidacy. So that's kind of all I have to say. I don't really have much else to say about that. I mean, I don't think the foreign interference in Canada, I think when that story finally does come out, it's probably not going to be as bad as we think it is. I just think that political parties tend to talk to representatives from other countries about economic matters and stuff. That's probably all it's going to be. I don't think that it's a spy movie type thing, but it's one of those things that's kind of in Canadian politics. So it's just a bad look, and you're talking about a foreign country arresting your political opponent, and Amr's point about it's we're so divisive at this point over so many things. It's just not a healthy way of talking about our country and our democracy. It's not healthy in general. If you're talking about your if you're talking about your opposite being arrested and stuff, it's not good. Anyways, I think that Carney should have just handled it swiftly, and it was disappointing he didn't. In terms of why it didn't impact the polls, I think this is a part of the election where a huge percentage of the country is actually still undecided. I'm only throwing out numbers here, but let's say 15% of the country was solidly undecided. When the polls call them, they just don't get represented in the polls. So the numbers that we're seeing right now can switch really quickly as people actually start to read the platforms and stuff. I've talked to a few people, people haven't even gone to the websites to read the platforms yet. They're kind of just subtly following it. I think that Carney's getting a lot of help from the media right now. I think the Trump issue helps him a lot. And I think that there's some aspects of what you guys said about Polyev is true, but I think a lot of it's just actually the talking points of liberals. So I don't think it's actually that representative of the truth. I think there's actually a lot of Canadians that are open-minded about Polyev. I don't really think they see him as a Trump figure. I think liberals do, but liberals are going to say that anyways. So I don't really think that's true. I think that the Polyev's biggest problem right now is that he's failing to get into the conversation. I think that just repeating the liberal points on the trade war did not differentiate himself on the most important issue that's facing Canadians right now. Canadians actually probably want to see differentiation between the candidates to see if maybe this guy would handle the trade war a little differently. But Polyev's just saying exactly what liberals are saying. So he's very much failing on that issue. I mean, I think that the reason the Conservatives are failing isn't because Carney's running a great campaign. I think it's because they're not running a good campaign. They're not running an excellent campaign, I would say. I think that when it comes to energy and stuff, the Conservatives are kicking the liberals' asses. I think that if you look at the crowd size, if you look at the actual grassroots, the liberals are not doing that well, and the Conservatives are doing very well. But I think that the dynamics of Canadian politics are that the Conservatives always are underdogs when it comes to Canadian media, which often is more left-leaning. And I think that the Canadian media is, for the most part, campaigning for Carney and making him look like a fighter for Canada and all that stuff. And Polyev is literally not even getting in the news. So you got to get in the news. You got to get noticed. So I don't think he's going to get noticed unless he does something bold. He has to stand for things that are unique, new issues. He's got to create a conservative party for 2025, not like Stephen Harper's party. I think he was differentiating himself from the old conservatives when he was pre-election, and now he just kind of seems like a normal conservative. So be a little bolder, get out there, come up with some new ideas, take some risks, get on some podcasts, because the Canadian media is not going to give you a fair shake at it. And I think that's what's happening. I think conservatives are just being really careful, and I don't understand why. I don't know. You have nothing to lose. I mean, you're already in opposition. If you lose again, you're back in opposition. You got nothing to lose. So go for it. Actually fight. Try to actually differentiate yourself. And I don't think Poilievre has done that. So I think it would be pretty bad for Canada if the Liberals won again. The suggestion that the Liberals are different with a new leader, I mean, they're kind of the same. They're kind of from the same group of people, same group. But in the end, if Poilievre doesn't get noticed in the next 6 days, it's over. That's kind of what's going to happen. I don't really believe the Liberals are going to win a mega majority. I feel like if the Liberals do win, it's going to be a minority. But I don't think Poilievre is doing a good job getting noticed with independents and urban voters that are actually on the fence, that are just kind of automatically going for Carney because he's getting in the news.
I think you're right in the sense that he fumbled, but I think part of the reasons that the Conservatives were so successful pre-Carney was, in my opinion, that they were light on details on what they planned to do. They focused all of their energy on the attack against Trudeau and what Trudeau has done, and a lot of it really resonated with Canada, with Canadians in general. I know I was one of them for a little bit of time until I dug a little bit deeper. And it's been interesting seeing that. I've been told that sometimes they're a bit strategic so that not all of their policies get stolen or something. But then they ended up at some point really getting behind cutting, axing the tax, which is something that is extremely simple to do for any new liberal leader. And so they wasted such a huge amount of their political capital trying to, attack Trudeau, attack Trudeau's legacy, attack people associated with him, that as soon as a fresh face showed up saying just enough of the right things, they suddenly had to pivot, and they didn't have anything to pivot to. So they spent a solid couple months trying to come up with something. And did they manage to come up with it? I don't think so. They tried the same style of attacks, but they really only work if people have a negative experience with the person. And so in 5 years, they would work, assuming Carney wins. But by that point in time, they really, really should consider having something that truly differentiate them beyond a few slogans.
Yeah, I agree with that. They have to differentiate more than they have, for sure. And I do agree with what you said about Trudeau being an easier candidate for Carney. I'm sorry, for Poilievre. Carney, it was an obvious matchup, and now Carney has not. I mean, I feel like when Carney became leader, Poilievre became less bold, and that's not that. It doesn't make much sense. It should have been the opposite.
That's true, but this is the thing, right? They always attack Trudeau's legacies and actions. Well, what do they do then when it's a new leader who didn't do anything, right? I would say, whenever I ask people whether they think Carney will try to delay the election as long as possible, a lot of people thought he might, but that would have been a horrible move for Carney, because then they would have given this period of time where the Conservatives would hammer in the unelected leader just dictating Canadian laws. And so Carney just cutting the carbon tax and then launching an election, it really kneecapped a lot of what I imagine they were planning to campaign on. So it'll be interesting to see. We still have almost 4 weeks to go, and a lot can change in 4 weeks. So maybe they'll find pictures of Carney in blackface or something. Oh, that was interesting. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to add.
It didn't work last time, though.
Yeah, it didn't work last time either.
I think Tristan actually has a point. So
yeah, it was just one last thing I wanted to say before I let Tristan share his remarks, is that I think we're going through, it's called a rally around the leader type of effect, where in the time of a crisis, people across the political aisle put a bit of their differences aside and back whoever's in charge. So when it comes to responding to tariffs, I struggle to see how the Conservatives can say anything truly different, right? You still got to stand up for Canada, retaliate as much as you can, and stay open for negotiation and a political solution. You can debate the details, but on campaigning, you can't really campaign much behind that. I think that's also part of the reason why Doug Ford is picking up in the polls, even though he's been around for a while and quite a few Ontarians don't like him. But yeah, that was the last point I wanted to make.
My only commentary I'll say about the tariff thing is that, like, he had to do a lot of what the liberals were doing, but it's like you have to do something. Like, you got to like say things. You got to get out there. You got to get on podcasts. You can't just hide.
That's true.
You got to say something, and he didn't do anything. He just hid. He hid for a month. It's like, why are you hiding? Get out there and say something. You're the opposition leader. Make a statement. Like, be bold about it. Have disagree with something. Like, it doesn't have to be the entire thing. He did nothing.
That would require them to have a core sort of identity to fall back on and bounce off quickly. But if you have to formulate it entirely depending on who you're running against, I see why a month would be necessary. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in here and because I forgot to reference the actual topic of Paul. I think that I agree with you guys. I think that the statement was pretty bad. It was bad look. It was probably not meant in seriousness, I hope, but it was a bad look nonetheless. And I think that Carney defending him, also a bad look. So I just agree on all those fronts on those, but I just I'd say the whole thing is just a bad situation, and I feel like Carney should probably have gotten some more bad press for it, rather than the copious amounts of generally positive press he gets.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with pretty much what everyone else has been saying, right? But my totally biased view, it doesn't change all this that has happened with, Pierre's mistakes and, Carney's gaffes and all of this. The liberal poll numbers keep on rising, right? Like, I think that's just an objective fact. And my totally biased view on this, we're all getting mega duped, like, as a country. Because, like, regardless, just put Pierre Poilievre aside for a second and put Trump aside for a second too. If we were just to look at the Liberal Party, like, objectively speaking, if this was an election that was on, like, that was, the key issue was the record of the Liberal Party for the past 10 years, I think that, like, you can make a solid argument that they should not be given another 4 years, right? Just, like, regardless of what you think about any other party, any other candidate. I'm not saying necessarily that you must absolutely have to vote for Pierre, but it's just, like, I find it incredibly hard to justify voting for the Liberals. Now, not voting for the Liberals is not the same as voting for the Conservatives, but I'm just saying, I think that not voting for the Liberals is, like, the very baseline that we should, as a nation, probably come to an agreement on, but it appears that people are agreeing the other way. So it kind of baffles me, right? And I just think, quite frankly, the way that this whole campaign has unfolded, and this whole, like, polling numbers and averages has unfolded, we're about to be duped into making a huge mistake, because as somebody mentioned earlier, that I think it was like 80 something % of Mark Carney's cabinet is the same as Trudeau's. So yes, they switched the leader, but it's fundamentally the same group of people with pretty much the exact same policies. Now, I know they pulled back on the consumer portion of the carbon tax, but even that is, like, there's still the carbon tax on the corporate side, and they're just, in my opinion, trying to hide the corporate tax so that it doesn't show up on your, like, heating bill anymore, but it's still baked into everything, right? Like, how do groceries get to the grocery store? Do you need fossil fuels, which is still subject to the carbon tax? So yeah, it's just they're trying to hide these policies, but fundamentally they're still the same. And I just think that it's unfortunate the way that I would agree with you, Sunil, that there's been a lot of mistakes that's made by Pierre Poilievre, right? And one thing about the tariffs, it's not just that he was slow to react it's really the point that you made earlier about like the lack of differentiation, right? So here in Canada, we have, or just any country that Trump is targeting with these tariffs, there's this like argument that, you know, we need to do dollar for dollar counter tariffs. And I think there's a fundamental kind of logical inconsistency there, where if you're saying that we're doing dollar for dollar counter tariffs, then you're both simultaneously trying to argue that tariffs are really bad, but we're gonna do it, right? Like you're saying that tariffs are just the worst thing ever. Like Trump shouldn't be doing this. He's a madman for doing this, and he's a loose cannon. But we're gonna do it, right? Like that's essentially what you're saying, right? So I think, you know, as people like to make fun of like Maxime Bernier and the PPC, and I know they're kind of like a meme these days, but like one thing that I will say that I actually agree with Maxime Bernier on was that I saw a podcast or an interview where he was saying that, like, no, we shouldn't do counter tariffs towards the United States. Like, let's just why tax our own citizens? Why not just continue to buy cheap goods from the U.S. so that way we can, you know, sustain a long-term trade war if Trump's intention is to drag this trade war on for a really long time. Right, the counter tariff will only cause us to be less competitive. So, you know, that is definitely, I think, a very logical position to take. But that's not what the conservatives chose, and that's not what the liberals chose. And on this issue, actually, the liberals and the conservatives are actually in complete agreement for once that we should be doing dollar for dollar counter tariffs. And I just think that that's a little bit of a mistake. But who raised? I don't know who raised their hand first, but whoever did. Sunil, you can go first.
I had a quick point, and then I'll pass it back to Amr. But I thought that the whole like consumer carbon tax conversation was really disturbing and dystopian in a way. And to describe that, like we've never in this country, we've never referred to the carbon tax as the consumer carbon tax. We've always just referred to it as the carbon tax. And then Mark Carney came out and said he's going to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. And nobody wanted to have a conversation of why he injected a word into it. Like nobody, like no, the only place I heard that this was only going to get rid of the consumer portion of the carbon tax was like on YouTube and through you guys and like on X. Nobody in the Canadian media wants to have a conversation with the fact that Mark Carney is changing the carbon tax to be what's the word, less transparent. It's a less transparent tax because it's baked in still. They're gonna, and Carney said he's gonna still potentially raise levies on industry, and nobody wants to have that conversation in this country. And what's even most like shocking about it is the conservatives haven't even raised this issue. Like Poilievre hasn't even said that explain the difference between the consumer carbon tax and the carbon tax. I just find that it's very dystopian from like an information point of view of how little Canadians even discuss details of policy, that like simplest policy detail.
That's actually very interesting. It was not the point I was going to comment on, but I think you're right. It is actually a very sneaky way to do it. But I think the problem the conservatives are having of pointing it out is they want it to be catchy. I think their strategy is to be as catchy as possible, and you can't. They've tried a few things about how like, oh, it's not actually repealed, but it doesn't seem to be resonating with as many voters. But yeah, no, Carney has been benefiting a lot of like positive coverage for a variety of reasons. Part of it's obviously biases and agendas, but here we are. The point I actually agree, but yeah, but to put all of that aside, we can talk about him all day and won't get anywhere. The point I wanted to mention though is I actually disagree with you there, Andy, about how counter tariffing is a bad idea. I think that the problem with tariffs is, and the argument against tariffs, so people who say tariffs are bad, they tend to say it's bad because other countries will also start applying their tariffs, and then we all end up losing out because of it. You can make an argument that, well, if we don't apply it, we don't have to deal with its consequences. But if somebody is punishing your exports and you do absolutely nothing in retaliation, are you really negotiating with them? If Trump plays precedent as a way to get Canada to do certain actions, are we just going to cave in to every demand they make without actually even putting up some fight? And I'm not going to get into, I think it's delusional when people think like Canada can really fully stand up to the US and like punch equally back. I think that's absurd. But Canada can still cause certain amounts of damage. And part of it is just, and in my opinion, is just national dignity, right? Is that at the end of the day, if somebody starts a fight with you, even if it's stupid, you got to punch back and see how far that goes. And we unfortunately have to live with the consequences of that, where we have to tough it out and hope that we have made the process of negotiating for the outcomes that Trump wanted through tariffs such a pain that maybe the better option is to actually just negotiate without tariffs. Like, and that's the thing. Like, I think if we followed Bernier's suggestion, we would just end up in a situation where, well, whenever the Americans want more concessions, they'll just ratchet up the tariff and they'll know we can't respond until it gets so far that we're absolutely screwed. And then what? We suddenly just try and match them and deal with a massive amount of pain. I think I think there's a term for it, but like it's an everybody loses type of situation that you unfortunately have to get into it, even if it scraps you. But yeah, I just really want to share that my opinion on that. But
yeah, I mean, so let me like clarify my position a little. I wasn't suggesting that we shouldn't do anything in retaliation if the Americans tariffs us, but I'm just really questioning the wisdom of counter tariffs, and especially dollar for dollar counter tariffs, which is what Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, or the liberals in general, are suggesting, right? So, I would be for targeted tariffs more instead of dollar for dollar, right? And if you just focus, it doesn't necessarily have to be dollar for dollar. I think that's maybe a little bit misguided. And it's also like we should maybe pick out certain industries that are, that have more impact to the Americans to counter tariff those, or that we import from America to counter tariff those. I mean, that gives us less impact, negative impact. So it's just I think that we should be looking for, a more targeted approach. And there's also like non-tariff related countermeasures that you can use, right? Like there's suggestions that saying that, maybe like, you make it less convenient for you raise the fee for American jets to pass over Canadian airspace, or you make, the border process of, travel between Canada and the US a little bit harder for citizens, right? Because it's like, if we're discouraging Canadians from going to the United States to spend money there, and Trump wants us to increase border security anyways, right? So yeah, I mean, there's different ways that you could kind of approach this, but like counter tariffing is basically like, it cripples our ability to sustain a really long trade war if that is Trump's true intention, right? Like if you actually believe that like Trump is just kind of using this as a negotiating tactic, and then we're gonna kind of counter tariff each other, but only for like a month, and then we're gonna work something out, then maybe, right? But I think we need to like hold on to the possibility that this is going to be a more drawn out, sustained thing.
And I'll say, yeah, that is a very sensible position that you have. I think what ends up happening, there's this unfortunate side of politics where sometimes the most sensible position requires a little too many words for people to really get behind. So if somebody goes with like with counter tariff, like dollar for dollar if we have to, and they leave it at that, then when the time comes, what they do is usually they do targeted tariffs, like what we've seen so far. And then they'll keep that option at the end there. It's okay, if we're desperate, we'll use it. Maybe they'll always claim they'll never be desperate. But that is the biggest downside with any political communication for a sensitive topic, is that It's something I think about a lot. But it's how do you get people more interested in looking beyond the slogan? That is something I think our generation needs to get better at. And I'm not saying like people here, like I think like as a whole, we're so used to just quick bites of information. And that's what all of the parties and the social and the media companies and the social media algorithms optimize for. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, but this is also ties into why I'm, very suspicious of Carney, because he literally made this. He called a snap election, and he made this campaign the shortest possible campaign that is allowed under the Elections Act.
Which I think it's a good idea. Otherwise, you would have had an unelected candidate, an unelected prime minister running the show for months on end.
But there's also a maximum amount of time, right? I think it goes from like 36 days to 50 something days. Like if he had chosen 50 something days, I feel like, we would have had a few more weeks to kind of let everybody hash out like their campaign positions a little bit better. But, making it the shortest campaign possible, I feel like he just wants to like sneak into office for 4 years while his polling numbers are high, right? Like that's the vibe that I'm getting, and I feel like are kind of not seeing it that way.
Yeah, I was just gonna say one last thing, but the tariffs is just the only problem I had that rubbed me the wrong way was that like they were clearly performative, like the second Trump escalated when we put tariffs on, he escalated, like they're off. Like it was just so clearly performative that it had a hard time not rubbing me the wrong way. And I felt like the entire tariff fight was just like a ploy for the liberals to like reposition themselves, which they did. So like I was just like, okay, now we're gonna have to watch the liberals like play games for a month when we probably should have had an election in January, and then it ends up helping them get reelected. And that's kind of where it rubbed me the wrong way, is like the idea of retaliation is one thing, but like the fact that the liberals like retaliation was all performative and all kind of nonsense, and they had the media kind of helping them with the tariff conversation, not questioning them when I would say they made a few bad moves, like Trudeau flying down to Mar-a-Lago and stuff. But in the end, yeah, and that, like what rubbed me the wrong way is the liberals were performative and the conservatives didn't differentiate themselves at all. Like Andy came up with a couple of examples. There's other things you can do, and the conservatives didn't even like raise the subject. So that was kind of disappointing for me.
Yep. All right. So that's everything I had for tonight, unless anybody has anything else they want to add. If not, we've been going on for a long time. This might have been one of our longest episodes ever. So, yeah, like, why don't we wrap it up here if everyone has nothing else to add? And Tristan, you're our outro guy, so I'll pass it to you.
All right. Well, thanks for watching this week's episode of Zillennial Money. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels, and comment on the video if you'd like. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.
Have a good one.
Happy Liberation Day.